Well, good evening, everybody. My name is David Shankland. I'm the chairman of the Anglo-Turkish Society, and it's very nice to welcome you to, in effect, our summer seminar before we go into the summer break. And what we're going to hear about today is early 19th century Istanbul from a particularly interesting perspective, American naval engineers. Really the role of external experts within the various areas to do with the sea and the ocean within the Ottoman Empire is one that has endless fascination. And of course, we all know about the influence that the Italians had, and clearly now we're moving on to the Americans. So I, for one, am looking forward to this talk enormously. I think the best thing to do is just to welcome our speaker, Ayşegül Avcı, to the stage, as it were, and say that the floor is yours, and we look forward to your talk.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me here and giving me the opportunity of sharing my work with you today. This is an ongoing project. I haven't yet published it, so I appreciate if you have any observations at the end of the presentations. Let me share my screen with you. And let me start by trying to explain the title a little bit. I wrote my dissertation on the Ottoman-American relations leading up to the first Treaty of Commerce in 1830. And when I was writing it, I learned about these naval engineers who were in Istanbul in 1831 during the ratification process. So I always thought that this was going to be a success story, that these people had a huge influence on the Ottoman naval forces and improved it. But as I read a little bit more and had a chance to see the archival documents, I realized that this might not be a success story I thought it would be. But on the other hand, they were very also influential in helping out the American community that was to be established in Istanbul in the 1830s. And they helped to lay a strong groundwork for the Ottoman-American relations in the future. So that is why I term it as a failed success. So the first encounter between the two countries was in 1800 when William Bainbridge had to come to Istanbul by the Fort of Algiers, and this was the first time when the representatives of both countries saw one another. Kabudan Pasha and William Bainbridge met, and they hosted each other on their own vessels. And Kabudan Pasha personally, Kabudan Pasha is the High Admiral of the Ottoman Naval Forces, and he had the chance to see the good conduct and the discipline of American officers and the technological advancement of the George Washington, the William Bainbridge's ship. And following that, this was also the first time when they talked about signing a treaty between the two countries. And after that date, we see in the Ottoman archives, there are several documents that give information about American society, government, geography. And in 1805, two Ottoman subjects, Kayserili Mehmet Dayı and Giritli Mustafa Dayı, were sent to the United States, and they stayed there for 1 year, and they wrote a report back to the Porte, Ottoman Empire, saying that the American advancements in naval technology were admirable, and they have abundant armories, ammunition, powder mills, and shipyards. Moreover, the American subjugation of the North American states in 1810s and the War of 1812 with Great Britain were considered as clear indication of American victories, American advancements in naval technology. In 1820s, the Greek Revolution led the US Mediterranean Squadron came to the Aegean Seas in order to convoy the merchant vessels. And several occasions, the American captains had a chance to meet with the Ottoman captains and with the Kapudan Pasha also. So they, again, over and over, they had the chance to witness the American vessels and American officers until 1827. On October 28, 1827, the combined forces of Russia, England, and France destroyed the Ottoman Egyptian navies at Navarin. And immediately afterwards, the Ottomans invited American representatives to come and sign the trade agreement in order to benefit from the naval advancements made in the US. The problem was the idea of reciprocity. The United States wanted to sign a treaty based on commercial privileges. However, the Ottoman Empire wanted to obtain naval advancements from the United States. So the negotiations during 1828 failed because David Offley, the consul at Smyrna, could not guarantee that Ottoman wishes would be granted. And in the short term, the Sultan Mahmud II hoped to obtain the supplies necessary to improve Ottoman military and naval forces. And in the long term, he wanted to get a greater knowledge of Western arts and technology. So the treaty would only be signed once the USA sent another group of representatives to Istanbul the following year. Charles Rain was a merchant, and he was able to convince the Ottoman representatives to accept American stipulation on commerce. However, he was only able to do so by agreeing to include a secret article which allowed the Ottoman Empire build warships in US ports. According to this secret article, the ships that were to be built for the Ottoman Empire would be of equal quality to those built for the US government, and the costs of construction could not exceed the cost of war vessels charged to the United States. Moreover, ship timber and other shipbuilding material would be sold to the Ottoman Empire whenever they wished at an equal cost to the United States government, and would be transported to the empire on US vessels. This was actually giving the Ottoman Empire whatever they wanted, but the Senate, during the ratification negotiations, considering that it would threaten American neutrality and that it was unconstitutional to compel US citizens to enter into contract with any power, they rejected the secret article. Upon the rejection, of course, the Americans expected a discontent and protest from the Ottoman Empire. So they decided to send David as the first representative, diplomatic representative of the US government. He was a war hero and he was a very experienced naval officer. So he was qualified enough to assist the Porte and to offer his advice and counsel in naval affairs. But his arrival to Constantinople received the expected displeasure from the Ottoman administration. Not only the rejection of the secret article, but also charge d'affaires title was also disappointing for the Ottoman officers. So they have Porter wait for 6 weeks before accepting him into the court. What changed, or who changed, or who convinced Ottoman Empire to sign to ratify the treaty without the secret article was Henry Eckford. The author of the secret article, Charles Rind, when he went back to New York, informed Eckford that about Mahmud's desire to modernize his naval sources and suggested he could sign contracts with the Ottoman administration. Eckford sailed to Istanbul with this ship, United States, and anchored in front of the city in August 1831. The Ottoman officers went on the vessel, they examined the vessel, and they really liked it. So they decided to buy the vessel for $1,500 and changed the name to Mesiri Ferah. Moreover, they asked Henry Eckford to observe the imperial arsenal and the Ottoman war vessels and write a detailed report containing the necessary steps to be taken to modernize Ottoman naval forces. In this petition, Henry Eckford emphasized the importance of education. According to him, skilled naval architects should be trained at an early age so that they could master new methods and advancements in the science of shipbuilding. Moreover, they would learn different methods of cutting timber speedily and efficiently on mountains and in woods. After this suggestion, Eckford continued to explain both his methodology and plans for the Ottoman Navy. He would build a 100-gun gunship of the line and a 64 frigate or steamship, similar to the one he brought over and sold to the empire. And all the vessels that he built would have copper plates, and aside from the physical beauty of the ships, they would also be built according to the laws of dynamics. Foreseeing that he could complete a new vessel in 6 months, he offered to take 15 to 20 students between the ages of 18 and 20 to the United States to teach them how to build a 64 gunship. Aside from the vocational training, these students would also learn the English language and thus help Eckford when he began his work in the imperial arsenal. And finally, Eckford suggested bringing back 70 or 80 skilled and informed people in the naval sciences from the US. And by combining their forces with the local Muslim architects, he claimed he could revolutionize the naval forces of the empire within 3 to 4 years. Eckford did not have 3 years to live, and if he had lived, he would realize that this was a very optimistic guess, optimistic prediction. Eckford's petition was a summary of a larger and more comprehensive plan regarding the modernization of the naval forces, including the education of pupils and the restructuring of the administration, alongside the actual construction of vessels. He began working on implementing his plans as soon as he signed the contract with the Ottoman Empire. First, he repaired the biggest ship in the Ottoman Navy, Mahmudiye, and at the same time, he began constructing a brand new vessel launched in July of 1832 called Bresto, which gained not only the approval, but also earned Eckford a gift from the Sultan. Eckford was constantly working to build new war vessels for the Navy, and both the Sultan and the Serasker Pasha, the head of the Ottoman army, appreciated his tenacity, which Eckford used, quote, toward producing the good understanding which so happily exists between the two governments, unquote. Winning the Sultan's approval and the support of the Kapudan Pasha, Eckford had a bright future in the Ottoman lands. Eckford used this increasing influence to help missionaries expand their presence in the city. The first missionaries of Constantinople were William Goodell and his family, and they arrived in 1830. And right before the arrival of Henry Eckford and his friends, there was a great fire at Pera, which consumed the house and all the belongings of William Goodell. They had to move to a house run by the Greeks, and Americans, Eckford and his friends, when they arrived, they rented rooms in the same residence just to be with William Goodell and his family. His wife, Mrs. Goodell, wrote her sister the gratitude towards the company how lucky she felt for the presence of the other Americans. While Eckford waited upon the Ottoman decision before selling his ship, he and Rhodes, Foster Rhodes was the second naval architect that I'm going to talk about. He and Rhodes and with other Americans, they accompanied Goodell in his excursions around the city and enjoyed Goodell's sermons at David Porter's house. Throughout the late summer and fall of 1831, this American community visited some of the landmarks in Constantinople, went to see the Sultan on Friday prayers, and even attended the circumcision ceremony of Sultan's son. Goodell narrates his experience in the ceremony in detail, and writing that they were admitted by high-ranking Ottoman officers and offered refreshments just because they were accompanied by Eckford and Rhodes. This friendship benefited the missionaries both mentally and financially. Eckford donated money to the missionary schools regularly, which enabled them to improve. And moreover, Eckford used his influence among Ottoman pashas to support these schools. Goodell wrote about the increasing interest among the Muslim population to his schools several times in his diaries and in his letters to the board. The head of one of the largest schools in Istanbul, Halim Efendi, shared his desire to open a school for Turks, which he thought could only be accomplished with the support of the Serasker or the Kapudan Pasha. To this informal proposal, Goodell replied, Mr. Eckford could actually talk to Kapudan Pasha about this matter. And in a conversation with the physician of the palace, Eckford spoke about the possibility of opening modernized school for Turks, which received a very positive interest. On another occasion, Eckford informed Goodell about an interesting conversation he had with some of the government officers about the education of the Turks. These officers proposed Eckford to take 100 boys and teach them the art of shipbuilding. Eckford answered he could only help these boys if they received a proper education, which could then lead to the opportunity for Goodell to open a school for Turks. Although these schools initially targeted non-Muslims, Goodell writes, Ottomans began to be interested in these schools, and after visiting the school at Arnavutköy, Ahmet Pasha left a donation showing his approbation and approval. A few months after this visit, Goodell proudly wrote that 2 new schools were opened for Turks with the support of the Sultan, and that missionaries immediately began preparing classes in Turkish and translating much-needed books into Turkish. In January of 1834, Goodell reported the opening of another school among Turks, this time within the walls of Sarajevo. Eckford's aid, both material and moral, helped them obtain the support of the Ottoman administration and thus enabled the missionaries to lay a stronger foundation for their future activities. However, Eckford could not see the results of his initiative of educating Ottoman youth because he fell ill in 1832. Its cause was unknown, with some even suggesting poison, suspicious of some high officers in the government who might be jealous of Eckford's rise. In his letter to the State Department informing of the death of Eckford, Porter stated that Eckford felt, quote, excessive anxiety and the vexations caused by the embarrassments thrown in his way by the jealousies of the Minister of Marine and others who were envious of the friendship which he enjoyed from the Sultan and of the high estimation in which he was justly held by him, unquote. Americans at the capital gathered to pray for Eckford, but on November 12, 1832, at 2:45 p.m., Eckford passed away. He left a donation to Goodell's schools on his death, and in remembrance of his name, Goodell asked the board secretary Anderson to acknowledge Eckford's name on the Missionary Herald. Eckford died only 1.5 years after his arrival, so the question is, what makes him important in terms of Ottoman-American relations? First of all, his presence in the empire made the secret article void. Ottomans would have the right to have warships built in US ports and would be able to obtain shipbuilding material. Hiring Eckford relieved the Ottomans from ordering vessels from the US, and Eckford himself arranged shipment of materials. Secondly, Eckford was able to support the missionaries by providing them the most necessary network aside from his own donations and friendship. And finally, Eckford had many plans for the modernization of the Ottoman naval forces. Eckford's legacy continued to amaze the Ottomans as well as American travelers who found their way to Constantinople. Eckford's death was mourned long after his death. His name and fame were remembered and reported on in American newspapers. Porter noted the Sultan's excessive grief upon learning about the death of Eckford, as Eckford's intention to improve the whole naval system were in line with Mahmud's desire. Mahmud was so impressed with Eckford's success that following his death, American presence did not come to an end, and instead, Eckford's foreman and friend, Foster Rhodes, would undertake his duty. Foster Rhodes first employed to complete the ship that Eckford began, and he continued his work until 1834, building several vessels for the Ottoman Empire, which earned the satisfaction of Mahmud II and the Kapıdan Pasha. The Ottoman government offered Foster Rhodes the role of chief constructor at the imperial arsenal with a salary of $8,000 to $10,000 per year. And Rhodes was employed with 15 other Americans, and he supervised over 600 people at the imperial arsenal, and the scope of the responsibility shows the trust invested in Rhodes by the Sultan and the Kapıdan Pasha. While Rhodes strengthened his position in the empire with his praiseworthy vessels, he quickly formed a closer relationship with the Sultan. The launch ceremonies at the imperial arsenal were held to demonstrate the naval power of the empire, and they were a clear indication of the importance attached to the navy by the Sultan, who attended each ceremony, sometimes accompanied by his sons and his mother. Aside from the royal family, Ottoman high officers, foreign ministers, and public paid great interest to these ceremonies. They began with prayers and sacrifice, and followed by Sultan's approval. He gave gifts and bahshish money to the constructors, and these events were narrated in the newspaper of the era, Takvim-i Vekai, in detail. These articles show that Rhodes, like Eckford, very quickly rose and obtained a highly prestigious state among Ottoman circles. Many of the ships that Rhodes built were sail ships because they were the main force of the navy, but early 1800s also witnessed the introduction of steamships into the world navies. The steamships were generally used to tow larger ships and carry ammunition and soldiers to the battleground until the 1850s, and only after the wide use of the screw propellers did the steamers become an effective war power. Thus, it was only natural for the Ottomans to focus on building sail ships. Understanding the importance of steamers for the future of the navy, however, one of the biggest accomplishments of Rhodes was convincing the Sultan, with the support of Kapıdan Pasha, into building steam vessels. Upon obtaining the Sultan's permission, Rhodes began building the first steamship, named Eseri Hayr, which was launched on November 24, 1837, followed by two more, Misiri Bahri in 1838 and Tair Bahri in 1839. The name of the first steamer, Eseri Hayr, refers to the Sultan's desire to build steamships as a complete production within the empire, because the empire did not have the required technology to build steam engines and thus had to order the engines from Great Britain. Knowing Sultan's desire and the necessity of being a self-sufficient country, Rhodes tried to modernize the arsenal too. Visiting the shipyard, Stephen Olin described the modern machinery and advanced appliances purchased from England that were used to construct first-class war vessels, and noted that the Ottomans had Rhodes to thank for the improvements at the arsenal. Similar to Eckford, Rhodes also understood the importance of skill and education among the youth and workers of the arsenal. While the students getting proper education at naval schools and the ones supported by the missionaries, Rhodes provided vocational education at the arsenal. Some of his apprentices later were sent to other shipbuilding yards on the coasts of the Ottoman Empire, and there they designed and constructed their own vessels and administered over the youth. Rhodes himself wrote, quote, "Nothing seems to have made so strong an impression in my favor as the improvement in the work of the carpenters and the unvaried pains I have taken to teach them," unquote. In the limited time he could work in Constantinople, Eckford was able to lay the foundations for a favorable relationship between the Sultan and the Americans, and Rhodes maintained this privileged state the Americans enjoyed in Ottoman lands. According to Ottoman laws, the warships cannot cross the Bosphorus unless they brought a representative on board to the capital or had a valid excuse. Yet in 1832, Captain Reed of USS Constellation and the following year, Commodore Daniel Todd Patterson of the US Mediterranean Squadron obtained permits from the Ottoman administration. Not only the naval officers, but also the Americans visiting or living in the capital were welcomed by the Sultan and other high officers. American chargé d'affaires David Porter was also amongst them, who enjoyed such privileges, since his rank prevented him from audience with the Sultan. American traveler Valentin Mott expressed his pleasure upon the good graces shown them by the Sultan. Quote, "For this distinguished mark of courtesy from His Sublime Highness, we were indebted to our much esteemed countryman, Mr. Rhodes, who was of our party." Mott stated that Rhodes had great influence over the Sultan, so much so that the Sultan had offered the title of Pasha to Rhodes, but Rhodes declined this offer quite modestly. Rhodes thus held great favor and standing in Constantinople, and offered his assistance and hospitality to his countrymen traveling in the city. Almost all of the travelers referred to Rhodes' cordiality. He received them at the arsenal, he hosted them in his own house or on ships assigned to Rhodes by the Sultan, and organized trips in and around the vicinity of the city, sometimes on his own, sometimes accompanied by his sons. There are only a few lines referring to the social lives of Americans in Constantinople, but since they were very few in number, they kept close contact with each other and maintained social engagements as much as possible. Remaining approximately 1 month in Constantinople, Henry Humphrey spent a lot of time with Rhodes in the late fall of 1839. He narrated how he had the chance of seeing all the presents from the Sultan including rings, snuff boxes set in diamonds, and shows of considerable value in Rhodes' house. He dined with him and took trips around the city on horseback with Rhodes and his 3 sons. The common notion in his visitors' narratives was the pride and honor they felt seeing the accomplishment of their countrymen in Ottoman lands. However, Rhodes' success in shipbuilding, although admirable, was limited. The Ottomans had long been inviting foreign experts into the country, and according to Emiriana, technology transfer was the most easily resolved problem. The sail ships had been built in the same manner for several decades, and Ottoman shipbuilders were incredibly industrious. After losing its navy at Navarin, the Sultan gave orders to build war vessels, and in 1828, there were a dozen varieties of vessels at hand, and the builders at the yards continued to build new warships. By 1831, there were 37 large war vessels, including 2 3-deckers, 7 2-deckers, 12 frigates, and 14 corvettes under the command of Kapıdan Pasha, which means that the Ottoman Empire was actually capable of building strong and able war vessels during a very short time period. The Mahmudiye, one of the largest and strongest warships of the period, was built by the Ottomans and launched in 1828. Although there were attempts to implement manufacturing grounds for steam engines at the arsenal, Ottoman education and resources could not keep up with such modern advancements and quickly fell behind. Like the steam engines on the first 3 steamers, the Ottomans had to purchase them and thus depend on Great Britain. In this respect, what could have been a revolutionized modern naval force, as Eckford and Rhodes hoped for, which would have included not only the construction of the new ships, but also new methods of operation and education, could not be realized. This was partly due to restrictions coming from the administration itself, and partly due to the financial and social and political challenges that the empire faced. Although the quality and quantity of the war vessels in the Ottoman Navy were increasing day by day, one of the greatest challenges was the deficit of able and skilled sailors. Greek subjects of the Ottoman Empire were known to be the competent sailors, and they primarily filled the ranks in the Ottoman Navy. However, with the Greek Revolution in 1820s, most of the Greek subjects of the empire were dismissed from the navy and shipyards, and their employment was terminated and even prevented. In addition to the removal of experienced men from the navy, the great loss of most of its sailors at Navarino left the Ottoman Empire in a tangling situation. The conscripts that were recruited to replace the Greeks had little training and skill. Furthermore, they were treated brutally, and instead of receiving the required education, they were forced into the navy. The warships built by Rhodes were admirable, but the crew was wretchedly manned, quote unquote. Traveling to Constantinople with Henry Eckford, George Decay shared the same perspective. In a personal letter to his friend, Decay wrote of the Ottoman forces that were all, quote, all raw and noise, no discipline, confusion, drying clothes on quarterdeck, officers and men squatting down and smoking together. In short, everything as bad as it can be, unquote. Sultan Mahmud intended to benefit more from the American assistance, and for that purpose, Kapıdan Pasha of the era, Ahmet Pasha, asked Rhodes to communicate to the US legation about Mahmud's desire to employ 4 American officers who could teach Ottoman officers naval tactics and all other subjects relating to the advancement and improvement of the imperial marine. Moreover, the Sultan intended to hire only American officers. For the Ottoman Empire, the US held a different position than the European powers. Due to its geographical distance and isolationist policy, the US was a secure force which would not threaten the Ottoman Empire. However, for the same reason, David Porter thought the employment of American officers cause disturbance or disharmony within the Ottoman-American relations. And Secretary of State John Force replied that although the US government would like to maintain friendly relations with the Ottoman Empire, this particular desire of the Sultan could not be accepted because sending experienced naval officers to foreign countries could create prejudice among the public. Not finding the support it sought from the US government and facing international threats, the Ottomans had to lean on Great Britain on this field too. Beginning from the 1820s, with the dismissal of experienced sailors from the navy and shipyards and the destruction of Ottoman navy at Naval, the Ottoman Empire suffered in terms of its naval affairs, losing its dominions in Greece in 1829 and Algiers in 1830, in addition to the resurrection of Mehmet Ali of Egypt between the years 1831 and 42, forced the Ottomans into seeking aid from foreign countries. Although relations were mended very quickly following Navarin, Ottoman reluctance to completely depend on Great Britain in naval matters can be seen in its employment of Americans and seeking American support by inviting US naval officers to the empire. However, unable to obtain intensive naval support from the US and incompetent against Mehmet Ali's forces, the Ottomans depended more and more on Great Britain. In particular, once Reşit Pasha was appointed as ambassador to Great Britain in 1836 and later in 1838, and as Minister for Foreign Affairs in 1837, the influence of Great Britain increased within the Ottoman administration. The State Department was informed of this change of power dynamics several times by the US legation in Constantinople, and in the spring of 1839, the translator John P. Brown wrote that English naval officers would be coming to the Ottoman Empire, and by the end of 1830s, Americans were to be replaced by the British. Although Ottoman statesmen acknowledged the necessity of making changes, they were unable to accomplish any of significance. By the middle of the 19th century, almost all foreign travelers and diplomatic envoys mentioned the corruption and tardiness in the empire, despite acknowledging the broad-mindedness, desire, and efforts of Sultan Mahmud II. He was aware of the corruption at the arsenal, but had limited power to change it for the better. The individual authority of Sultan made it possible for Americans to increase their power and enable technological diffusion. However, his death also marked the end of the privileged status the Americans enjoyed in Istanbul. Resigning after Mahmud's death, Rhodes departed from Smyrna with his family. Some of the Americans working with Rhodes at the arsenal left with Rhodes, but John Reeves, Rhodes' brother-in-law and foreman, decided to stay, hoping the favorable position that Rhodes enjoyed would pass on to him. However, his expectations were not met, for international dynamics had already turned to favor the British, and the American engineers were to be replaced by them. Although he stayed in the country and completed the vessel that Rhodes began, in a petition dated 1851, Rees was still trying to get his full salary from the Ottoman Empire. However, the sources do not indicate a conclusion to the matter, and so it remains unknown whether Rees were able to collect his full salary or not. What can be termed as a failure in naval modernization, however, should be considered a success in the establishment of Ottoman-American relations. The success and prestige of Americans, as well as their personal attitude, created a strong impression of Americans as hardworking, able, educated, and skillful people. Although this chapter ended with the disappointing experience Rees had with the Ottoman officers, the Ottomans did not completely stop benefiting from naval advancements in the US and instead sought interaction later by the middle of the century. The Ottoman administration decided to send Emir Efendi, an instructor at the naval school and a commander, to the US for the examination of US Navy yards, docks, ships of war, and other establishments connected with the military marine. Technology transfer between the US and the Ottoman Empire was not limited to the naval field, but also extended to include arms. Since the early 1830s, American entrepreneurs come to Constantinople to introduce their firearms to the Sultan. And Ottoman Empire became the biggest importer of guns from the US by the end of the 19th century. Besides the interaction in naval matters, the diffusion of technology and science spread to agriculture. American cotton found its way into Ottoman lands in the late 18th century, and the Ottomans were already aware of its quality. In an effort to improve cotton production and agriculture in Turkey, the Sultan asked the US government to send an expert. In 1847, Dr. Davis established a model farm in Constantinople and tried to educate Ottoman youth about the best manner of agriculture, and he even led to the discovery of emery deposits. Many technicians and entrepreneurs went to the Ottoman Empire. Many travelers visited the Ottoman lands, yet the most influential and strong branch of American ventures were the missionaries, not only in schooling, but also in medicine. Through the hospitals they opened all over Anatolia, American missionaries brought science, health, and education to the Ottoman subjects. The individual initiatives of Eckford and Rhodes helped to build a bridge between the Ottomans and Americans, both as an administrative mechanism and on a personal level. That will be all of my speech today. And once again, thank you for inviting me, and I hope you enjoyed. I hope it was it was helpful, at least informing. And I appreciate if you have any questions or observations or feedback in general.
Well, thank you very much indeed for what was a very, very comprehensive and clear overview about an absolutely fascinating problem. I think if we stop sharing screens now, we can go back to Zoom. There we are. There we are. Yes, I mean clearly the empire is extraordinarily important in the history of the empire in all sorts of ways, and perhaps a pity that so traditionally in Turkey it's the pasha who's in charge of the army in the land forces who's the really important one, and everybody will remember the story that's so often told of the man who goes back to his mother and says, "Mother, I've become an admiral," and she says, "Oh, if only you'd become a pasha, then perhaps you really would have made something with your life." And then I think that emphasis on the land forces is of course terribly strong even today to some extent, and yet the flashpoint for the First World War, Turkey's entry in the First World War, was of course through this whole question of what happens to ships. It wasn't a land event at all. And I suppose that really would bring me to my first question. I hope there'll be many others, but it's this whole, I mean, how did it happen that Britain had such a strong and in theory cordial relationship with the Ottomans during that period, and yet somehow or other we ended up with the Ottomans jumping into the German camp, actually also, you know, in terms of the ships. I mean, how do you understand that transition? Because I've still not fully understood it.
That is a question that I keep trying to understand, actually. Whenever I talked about this, my topic with my friends here, they asked the same question. Why, I mean, if we had greater relations with Great Britain, how we ended up on German side, you know? Yeah. So I don't know. At some point, as far as I know, the German naval assistance entered into Ottoman agenda. And like what happened here, like the entrance of Americans, the Germans also created a rivalship to Great Britain. Mm-hmm. And the Ottoman Empire welcomed it because in terms of this naval assistance, the Ottoman Empire tried to get help from many different sources. Before the Americans, there were Swedish people, and there were British again, and the French, and the United States followed some sort of balanced politics by inviting sources and cooperation from different countries. That is how they wanted to prevent the country from leaning on only one country. So I would assume, again, I'm not an expert on this topic and on this period, but I would assume since they welcomed German influence against British domination, they leaned towards Germany, and they ended up on the German side.
Yeah, so it's a question of balance. Yeah. And here the relationship of the different branches of the military, is this something that has come across your thought process very much? I mean, you know, the Germans getting involved with the Ottoman army, perhaps at the same time as the British were still engaged with the navy. Did you see some kind of division of influence in this way?
Oh yeah, definitely. Influence in this period was limited to the navy, not the land forces. Mm-hmm. So in the land forces, the Ottoman Empire was still depending on Great Britain, especially after Hünkar İskelesi Treaty with the, I mean, in 1828-29, the Russian forces like moved really forward on Ottoman soil and threatened the Ottoman Sultan. So they had to sign this Hünkar İskelesi Anlaşması, which kind of threatened the domination of Ottoman domination over the Bosphorus in favor of Russia. And after that, Great Britain realized that if Russia had a chance to pass the Bosphorus, it could threaten Great Britain's route to India. And on the other hand, French conquering Algiers, which was part of the Ottoman Empire. And then Mehmed Ali's forces were really effective in threatening the Ottoman Empire. So Britain's policy towards Ottoman Empire was to protect and maintain its unity. So whenever they needed, Ottomans needed, Great Britain offered its help. It also sent the fleet to Mediterranean against Mehmet Ali, and sent aid to Ottoman Empire, and it was they were influential in the land forces. And after the end of 1830, they became influential in the Navy too.
Yep, yep, I see. So do you think the American attempt was always going to be a failure, or do you think it could have been successful?
Well, before I knew nothing, I thought it would be a success. But, as I started reading a little bit more about the US politics, I realized that it was not going to be a success because the US government did not support its did not engineers. Engineers were these individuals only. They could not we are talking about 2 or 3 people and 15 Americans who were helping in the arsenal. And it was impossible for them to create a full-scale reformation because the Ottoman Empire at this point was very powerless and the administration was already very corrupt. So it takes a lot of time and courage and effort, I think, to turn a country from this level of corruption. So no, I don't think the Americans had any chance to improve the Ottoman naval forces.
Well, thank you. That's a very clear answer. I like it.
Well, I don't know. I'm not an Ottomanist, so maybe some of you have different ideas, but that's what I think, at least.
Does anyone else want to make any comments? Please go ahead if you would like to. We're a nice small group.
Yes, me please.
Go ahead.
Go ahead,
if no one else. Okay, thank you very much, Ayşegül. Well, I learned a lot. Even though I consider myself an Ottoman historian, I had very little idea, mostly thanks to you, about the American involvement in the 19th century Ottoman Reformation period. And I was very surprised because we are very used to seeing Europeans, like European advisors, being hired by the Ottomans as supervisors, I don't know, officers, officials who's for the army, for the other branches of the government as well. But to be honest, I had very little idea about the American involvement, and it sort of breaks my heart to call it a failure because they managed to do something, at least. They built ships and all that. So I don't know. I have questions in mind. And I have other questions, but they are a bit insignificant, not a major one, but being an Ottoman historian, I'm sort of curious about some details. If I'm not taking any of your time, I would like to sort of forward them. Well, this Pasha, not the Pasha, but what was his name? Foster Rhodes. So he was, well, I had this question in mind as I was listening to you. I thought, well, he was wearing the fez in the picture that you shared with us. And he was hired by the government. So I was really curious, did they give him the title of the Pasha? And they did, they offered him, but he declined. Do you know why he declined?
Well, the problem with this period is that I don't have the documents written by these engineers. So there are just a few letters written by Foster Rhodes. Whatever I could collect came from the travelers who contacted with these engineers or the government documents, archival documents. And in one of them, I can't remember the traveler right now, but he wrote that Foster Rhodes rejected this Pasha title because he did not want to be forced to stay in Constantinople beyond his wish. Whenever he wanted to live, he should be able to live. And he thought, according to this traveler, Foster Rhodes thought if he obtained this Pasha title, he had to stay in this country. So I don't know if it is true or not, but the idea is a little bit more this nationalistic, because these engineers were so nationalist that they were first and foremost Americans. And whenever they wanted to, they should be able to go back to their countries. So,
Yeah,
I don't know.
and perhaps I have this question in mind. Perhaps the American government did not let him.
Oh no.
No.
American government specifically, it had instructions to David Porter saying that no way you should not interfere in the arrangements between the Ottoman government and the engineers. You can introduce them, you can offer translating services, but in no way you can be a part of these arrangements officially. So the US government had nothing to do with it.
Okay. And I have another minor. Well, from the very beginning of your presentation, what was the name of the first engineer who passed away in Istanbul?
Henry Eckford.
Yeah, Eckford. Is his grave in Istanbul?
Oh no.
No.
After he died, they kept their body in a cask of wine, and an American vessel came and took his body, brought back to America to his family, and he's buried in New York, if I'm not wrong.
I believe this is very extraordinary. I mean, there is like the British cemetery in Istanbul. The British who die, I mean, most of them, at least to my knowledge, who passed away in Istanbul, they are usually buried in Istanbul. So it's even a much far away, let's say, land. The body was still transferred. So this is sort of impressive for a period this early in the century.
Well, I really don't know a lot about the burial procedures. I know that David Offley, the first American consul at Smyrna, he is buried in Smyrna. And the missionaries or the children of missionaries are also buried in Ottoman lands. But, well, yeah, they decided to bring Henry Eckford back to his own country.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Any more people would like to ask anything? Please do. Any more thoughts? I mean, the problem is, of course, when you're building up a navy, the incredible cost, as you say. Corruption is to some extent present, I think, in many shipyards because it's so easy to steal things. I mean, you can steal the sails, you can steal a bit of rope, you can steal everything. You know, even till today, that's a problem in shipyards. But the sheer process of renewing such complicated vessels and the technologies which are taking place all the time must make it almost impossible to keep an up-to-date ocean-going navy. And yet, of course, the Ottomans needed it, and so it must have been a very, very difficult situation.
Yeah, actually, after this American chapter, the Ottoman Empire began purchasing ships instead of building ships in the Ottoman lands. And they began purchasing from Great Britain because they realized that they were so far behind, it would be impossible to actually keep up with the technological advancement. They tried to create factories and establish steam engine building materials, etc. And at some point they were able to do it, but still, because of the money, they could not keep up with it. So it was mostly cheaper to purchase the whole ship instead of trying to build it in Ottoman lands.
And the crew was always from one of the millets. It was never a Turkish crew, or
I think there were Turks too in the navy, but the majority was the Greek Greek people. Yeah. And I read that in a lot of documents and the books, and they say that with the Greek resurrection, all of the Greeks were pushed away from all of the government's positions, and the devastating effect was felt in the navy because most of the experienced and able and skillful sailors were the Greeks.
Also, in the field of diplomacy, that was devastating as well. I mean, I never realized that hard on Navy, but I know from diplomatic history, because all of the dragomans were coming from the Greek origin. It was sort of, I mean, the Ottomans had no human sources for like filling these very suddenly empty spaces after the Greek rebellion, Greek independence. So this was groundbreaking.
Yeah. I think especially after for the diplomatics, I think the Armenians began to fill the void as translators, right? Because the American translators were the Armenian origin people in the first couple of years.
That would be logical.
Yes, and they also established the translation office, the Ottoman translation office, right away. Mahmud II did that to sort of raise Muslim translators for the field of diplomacy.
Yeah, it was always going to be very tricky to move from a multicultural empire to a national one. Obviously, yeah, I mean, in all these contracting situations, it's the great issue. So you're not really one of those modern historians that argue that the Ottoman Empire never declined. You know, we have this school now that says the narrative of the Ottoman decline is exaggerated. What do you think about that?
Well, I really am not an Ottoman historian. I studied American history for my life, American cultural literature.
Right.
And what I know about the Ottoman Empire is very limited. But I would argue against the decline arguments. But again, I mean, in the presence of Sena, I prefer not to say anything. She probably knows much better than I do.
Yes.
Sena, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is the Ottoman Empire did decline, of course. The question is, I suppose, how we frame the narrative. Is that the way that you would put it? Well,
when you say decline, I mean, in which field are we talking about? Because there was always I think about the modern countries. I think about the same argument about the modern countries too. In which field are we talking about the decline? If we are talking about the production and or trade or conquest or the military power, yes, there was a decline in the Ottoman Empire in its later centuries, but technology was Mahmud II and before him Selim III, they were reformist sultans, and they turned their faces towards the West in order to obtain the advancements. Yes, it started with the military, but later it turned into to include cultural and intellectual fields too. So in this respect, they were not in decline, but they were trying to improve the country. So I don't know how we should define this decline. That's what confuses me actually about this claim, this argument.
What do our colleagues think? How would you define it?
I'm very old school. I'm I usually stick with the old theories most of the time, and I agree with Ayşegül. Obviously, it depends what field you are looking at. So if you are looking at the intellectual area, I don't know, technology, we can talk about something else. But in terms of politics, if we're talking about the territory that you have, of course, there is an obvious decline. So this is a matter of perspective.
Indeed.
And Ayşegül is trying to fool us, saying that she's not an Ottoman historian, but as you see, well...
please, did you wish to say something?
No. I mean, we see that she is quite competitive in that sense. So
I wasn't there.
Could I ask for a clarification just at the beginning? I may have missed your explanation of how exactly these two Americans became involved in the first place. Could you just remind me, because I must have missed that bit?
Of course. Charles Rent was a New York merchant, and he was sent as a representative of the United States to negotiate a treaty agreement with the Ottoman Empire. And he signed the secret article. And during these negotiations, he realized that the Ottoman officers aimed to modernize their navies, and they put a lot of pressure during these negotiations to obtain naval privileges from the US. So when he turned back to New York, he talked with Henry Eckford, informed him about Mahmud's desire of modernizing his navy. And Henry Eckford built this ship, the United States. And he was already building a lot of ships, by the way, to sell to foreign countries. So this was not something new for him. So after the United States, he traveled to Constantinople to sell his ship. And he actually, his plan was to sign a contract and turn back to his country and keep building ships for the Ottoman Empire. But when the Sultan and the Kaptan Pasha offered him a position at the Imperial Arsenal, he decided to stay.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. And something else that struck me from your narrative is the extent to which it appeared that the Sultan himself had a direct link with these visiting. Now, this is for me very interesting, because I always assumed that the Sultan avoided meeting such visitors as much as he possibly could. That maybe something has changed, but you know, all the early travel accounts are very clear about the fact that the Sultan avoided meeting foreigners. So do you think there's a change going on here, that the Sultan is actually getting to know these people personally? Do you think that was the case?
Yes, definitely. I mean, there are several accounts that say that Sultan, they saw Sultan and walking hand in hand in the gardens of the palace, and that they were, Rhodes has the ability, and he was allowed to visit the Sultan whenever he wanted. And Rhodes actually used this power to threaten the people at the arsenal. Rhodes was threatening them, saying that if you are you are not doing your job, I'm going to the Sultan. You know, he used this power, and I think Mahmud was really interested in modernizing the navy and having these skillful engineers, foreign engineers. He also wanted to educate himself about what more he could do, and also he wanted to support these American engineers, because there were some sort of jealousy among the Ottoman people and the workers at the Imperial Arsenal. They were kind of, there are some criticisms towards the Muslims and Turks of the period because they were so jealous of the Americans who came from abroad and got a very high position. So what is the difference? Why should they get that position? And so the Ottoman Sultan tried to support with his personal relationship with these engineers to suppress these kinds of criticisms too, or jealousies in this field. And I heard a lot about Mahmud II having personal relationships, but I am not sure about the previous sultans. I would say no, they would not keep very close contact. But I mean, Mahmud II was a different sultan. Even his clothes were different. I mean, when you put his picture, his drawing with the previous sultans, you can realize the difference. He had a modernized jacket and pants, you know, the fez, etc. And the previous sultans were wearing all these big clothing like kaftans and sarıks. Mahmud II actually forced the people of the government to wear westernized and modernized clothes. But at the same time, he was also criticized by the especially ulema, the class that is responsible for school and education. And there were some traditionalists who did not really want to be modernized or westernized. So yeah, I think Mahmud, there is a direct transformation in Mahmud's attitude, but again, I cannot compare him to the ones because I don't know.
Yeah, that is extraordinary. I mean, the Grand Vizier at the time must have been very annoyed. I mean, if you're the Grand Vizier, you don't want anybody to meet the Sultan that you don't have control over. I mean, it must have been extraordinary. Extraordinary. I don't know whether you.
Probably. Again, because we do not have many documents that reflect the attitude of Ottoman pashas and grand viziers or other important people, I don't really know exactly what they thought, but the official government attitude was actually celebrating these engineers because the Takvim-i Vekaidi, the newspaper of the era, actually celebrated these engineers and their works. So it doesn't matter whether the Kabudan Pasha or the Grand Vizier were jealous of American engineers. They often supported them. But again, with the death of Sultan, the American influence ended very quickly.
Yeah, well, that's extremely clear. Extremely clear. And is there anything in the records about the adequacy of the payments? Did the finances go smoothly?
The salaries, you mean?
The salaries and the payments for the ships and the supplies. Normally, it's quite difficult to make everything come together.
Yeah, there are many documents in the Ottoman archives that show that the Americans, at least, were getting paid very regularly, twice a month, and there were no problems with that. But there were fiscal problems in the Ottoman Empire. There were many documents that actually tried to divert them, find a way to pay for the constructions of ships. For example, the first vessel, the United States or Mesiri Ferah that Henry Eckford brought, the Ottoman Empire purchased it for $1,500,000, but it paid like $90,000 in cash and the rest as opium to Eckford, so that Eckford would sell the opium and get the money. So instead of cash, they had to pay with commodity because the Ottomans did not have that kind of money, or I mean, they had the money, but they didn't want to use the money in one purchase. And this happened a lot, actually.
Goodness me, opium. And where did he sell the opium, do you know?
Oh, he couldn't sell because he died. So
well, that's a problem.
Yeah, the opium was sent to his sons. And I don't know if the sons were able to sell the opium, but probably they were able to, because the Americans were trying to buy as much opium as they could from Turkey at that period. So it wouldn't be a problem.
Wow. Wow. And what did the Americans want the opium for medicine?
Well, some of it was used, brought back to the United States and were used as medicine. But most of the opium was sent to China and the East Indies to be sold there as a opioid.
Goodness me, well, that's fascinating. Really quite fascinating. Yeah. Well, thank you. Wow. Does anybody else would like to ask anything? Someone who hasn't asked any question yet, please go ahead. Please, Melody, go ahead.
Melike.
Thank you much. It was wonderful. I just want to ask a very technical question. In order to do such a research, I'm sure you have lots of sleepless nights reading archival documents. So please, a little bit tell us, like, what kind of different archival documents you put for this research, because it has two different parts. So I'm really curious for the Ottoman part and for the American part. So I'll be happy to hear that. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question. Actually, for the Ottoman part, it was pretty easy to call part of the sources, because you can easily access the documents from the Başbakanlık Osmanlı Arşivleri, and Sena really helped me reading these Ottoman documents a lot. But the problem is that with the COVID, the documents related to Navy was kept in Beşiktaş, and during the COVID, they were transferred to the Başbakanlık Osmanlı Arşivleri in Kağıthane, and they are still inaccessible for me. So there is a group of documents that I haven't seen yet, but they were technical documents explaining the qualities of vessels, etc. So I'm not focusing on that part. For the American side, there is, of course, the National Archives that gives you the diplomatic perspective, and they are all digitized. You can access them online. But for personal documents, I went to Library of Congress to collect the sources of papers of William Goodell and Daniel Todd Patterson and some other people who were at the time in Constantinople. And there were also captain's letters kept in Washington, D.C. archives. They are not digitized, they are still on microfilms, but they are the letters that the American naval officers wrote to the Minister of Navy. So they also gave some insights about the official talks, official meetings between these officers and the Ottoman representatives. I took a look at them, and the missionary reports, definitely they are kept here at Harvard. So I had a chance to see the letters written to the secretary of the board. So yeah, I tried to reach out as much as I can, because as I said, these engineers did not leave anything. So I don't know what they thought. I don't know what they wanted to do, or what they were criticisms were, what kind of problems they faced. What I could find, so I tried to find I tried to find the information from the people that actually had a close contact with them, like travel narratives. They are almost all of them are published. And there is also a Massachusetts Historical Society here, which kind of collected, in its collections, there are some documents related to the travelers who went to Constantinople, but they aren't published yet. So yeah, I mean, I tried to collect as much as I can, many sleepless nights, but I like this part actually. I like the research part. I think it's my favorite part. So it was okay, it was good.
Does that answer your question? Okay. I don't know, Peter, whether you studied the Ottoman Navy at all, have you, in your various excursions? I don't know whether you can hear us. So our good friend Peter Andrews, who's actually an anthropologist. Right, there we are, Peter. What would you say about the Ottoman Navy?
No, I have regrettably no knowledge whatever in that respect. The only thing I have noticed is that there is an Ottoman caique in one of the largest country houses in Britain, which was presented in the 1860s.
Oh, and how did it get there?
because the Duke of Devonshire was ambassador at the time.
Oh, I see. And he brought it back. Yep. Yep.
Mhm.
Yep. Mm. Did you have any questions?
No, I don't. It was very interesting, but my ignorance, I'm afraid, keeps me dumb.
Not at all. Not at all. Not at all. Well, I mean, I think, therefore, I think we probably have to say thank you very much for a really fascinating talk. And I'm still struck by this extraordinary ease with which it appeared to be possible for them to build these ships in America and bring them to Istanbul like that. I mean, it's such a long way, and how they managed to outline their technical specifications with a system where the mail would have been taking, I don't know, weeks to reach America is really quite extraordinary. It seems to have happened also efficiently. I don't know whether, as a last comment, you have any reflections about that, whether this just how successfully the whole process went.
Well, in my dissertation, I studied the merchant fleet of the United States and the opium trade. And you can actually follow the vessels leaving the US ports, coming to and traveling to different ports on the way, entering Smyrna, buying opium and other products, and also following another route. And each one of them collected the letters from that country and moved with the commodities it bought. So yes, it is fascinating, and it was very difficult to follow everything. But at the same time, that was a period. I mean, with the introduction of the steamships, it became easier to move. It took shorter periods. This technological advancement was amazing. Definitely a few steps upwards, but the sail ships, again, it required a great knowledge and skill, I think. So yeah, it is very fascinating to take one ship, to build it, to bring it to Istanbul and build new ships in Tersane. That is very good. Yeah, I really like studying that period too.
Well, absolutely, and thank you for the background about the economics, because it makes it much clearer about how that could work. Well, in that case, we simply say thank you so much, and we to everybody for joining to our speak. So we wish you all success, and so there we are.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me again. Really, I learn a lot. I practice a lot when I'm sharing my work. So it was really great for me too. And I'm so happy to meet with you. Thank you very much, Craig and David, and the participants. Thank you very much.
Good. Well, I'll say good night then, and good night.
Bye bye.
Bye.